o'clock, and it ended up being 7:30. And I saw 3 different groups meeting. In one room was the Catholic Mass, and another room was the Orthodox Divine Liturgy, and in another room there was a group of other Christians gathered together for prayer. And I thought, isn't this wonderful? It doesn't so much represent a division within the Christian community, but it represents the rich traditions that each of us come from. And we come together able to celebrate from our different traditions and yet come together in unity. And as Dr. Mendez and I were talking this morning, he reminded me that it's like a symphony, playing different instruments. And as we play those different instruments, a much greater and a much more beautiful sound is made. It echoes the words of St. Ignatius of Antioch, who said that as we exercise our different gifts together, it is the song of Jesus Christ being played. It's the song of Jesus Christ being played in the prisons of the world and in the communities of the world. And that is a precious gift that we have in Prison Fellowship International. And as we talk about a past worth preserving and a future worth pursuing, this is one of the seamless things that I think will run through the past and carry us into the future. A few years ago, I was in Latin America, and I was privileged to visit a prison for the criminally insane. There are a lot of terrible prisons in the world, and I'm often asked, what's the worst prison you've ever been in? And I think that probably was the worst prison I had ever been in. Because not only were the conditions terrible, the condition of the individuals was beyond description. These were criminally insane people who were being kept quiet by drugs. Some of them were in restraints. All of them were bedridden, partially or completely. I went there with a Catholic youth group from the Charismatic Renewal. And these young people went to the prison every day. Every week. Every Sunday they would go to the prison, and they would go from room to room, from bed to bed. They would sing. They'd have guitars, and they would sing to the men. Some of them would read psalms, sit by the bedside of these men reading psalms. And others would just go from bed to bed, carrying a washcloth and wiping the sweaty foreheads of men who, in the heat of the summer, had no means of being cool. They were just lying in sweaty bedclothes, unable to comprehend reality. And I realized that they weren't able to comprehend reality. And I wondered if they could understand what was happening to them. Could they understand the psalms that were being read? Could they understand the songs that were being sung? And I realized that it didn't matter much. I think they could understand the love, the care of another human being coming to them in compassion, in the compassion of Jesus, and expressing concern and solidarity with them. Well, the next day we were also privileged to visit with the bishop. We told the bishop, I went with one of the leaders of the group, not one of the young people, and we told the bishop about our experience in the prison. And a smile came over his face. And he said, I went to the prison with those young people at Easter. And he said, it was one of the most profound experiences of my life. Because for the first time, I've been in the church all my life. I know the canon law backwards and forwards. But it was the first time in my life that I experienced the living church. I experienced the living church in the love that those young people had for those men who are so despised, so isolated, so rejected, and suffering so much. That bishop happened to be our present Pope. And it is the living church. And what you and I represent is the living church. The unity that we have as followers of Jesus is a unity in service, expressed in service. It's not a unity expressed in a commonality of liturgy or common tradition, but we do have a unity in service. And some people would call that an ecumenism of the trenches. It's not an ecumenism because we agree on all the points of doctrine or we agree on a common liturgy, but we agree together that we can make a world of difference for good in the world by doing what Jesus called us to do. And that's a part of the past in prison fellowship that's worth preserving. I'm not sure that there's much else worth preserving. Certainly not programs aren't worth preserving, institutions aren't worth preserving, and so forth. There's a unique thing happening where I live. I live in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, and we have a wonderful national park there. It's a UN heritage site. It's designated as a UN heritage, I think it's a UN heritage site. And just recently the government has announced that they're going to be building a monument on one of the most beautiful parts of that park, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, looking over to Europe. And that monument is going to be more than 300 feet high. It's going to be called Mother Canada. It's a monument to the First World War, on the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. And it's in recognition of the sacrifice made by those who fought not only in the First World War, but the Second World War, in the Korean War, and in subsequent wars. It's been very divisive. And one of the divisive aspects is that the government is spending millions of dollars to create a monument at the same time as funding is being cut back for those who have fought in the war, for those who are suffering the consequences of warfare through traumatic stress injuries and so forth. There is always a tendency, and it is so much easier very often, to create monuments out of something, or to create monuments in recognition of something, than to do what is really needful in response to present circumstances. And so as we talk about a past that's worth preserving, we need to be very careful about what it is that we're preserving. Some things are not worth preserving. Some things are not worth commemorating. But other things are vital to the character and the spirituality and the vitality of an organization or a people. We also need to be very careful about what the implications are of what we're preserving. Because everything means something, says something. Now let me talk a little bit about a future worth pursuing. When none of us really know or can adequately predict the future. And in any case, it seems to me always just a little bit on the ridiculous side to talk about the past and the future as if they are two discontinuous realities. They're not. Tell me, when does the future start? When does the future begin? We're always moving into the future. We're always moving from a past into a future. It's a journey. It is not a separate journey from the past and into the future. It is a continuity, a continuous journey. And so it is needful always for us to be, at every moment of our lives, whether it was yesterday or today or tomorrow, to be sensitive to what the Spirit is doing in the world and what the Spirit is saying to us. Many organizations get themselves into serious trouble when they pursue dreams and visions for the future that are either disconnected from their roots or mission, or that are a strategic response to a particular need or crisis. And they jettison the past in order to embrace a new reality, or something that they see as a new reality, and lose their connection with the past. And both, losing sight of the past, losing sight of where we have come from, and becoming so focused on something new, both of those things can cause something that is known as mission drift. And mission drift refers to an organization that loses or deviates from its first love, from its calling. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens little by little. Small decisions that are made, small things that are forgotten, little compromises that are made. And over time, an organization is no longer recognizable in terms of the mission by which it first became founded. So as we pursue the future, we need to stay true to our mission and focused on our vision. By faith, we hold on to our calling while straining ahead to take hold of the future. St. Paul put it this way, and he says it so beautifully. He reiterates it twice in Philippians chapter 3, verses 12 and 14. St. Paul says, "Not that I have already obtained all this or have already been made perfect." So we recognize where we are today isn't complete. There is more for us. "But I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me." I press on to take hold, to fully realize that purpose, that calling for which Jesus called me. So we have to continually go back and remind ourselves of that calling on our lives. Why are we here? Why have we come here? Why do we do what we do? And then he says in verse 14, "I press on to the goal to win the prize for which God has called me." And again, reiterating the same thing. We move forward into that purpose, into accomplishing that purpose for which God has taken hold of us. There's an interesting study. Sometimes we look at corporate experiences, and there's so much to learn. One of the most venerable automobile manufacturing companies in America was the Studebaker Corporation. Dan and I are old enough to remember Studebakers. Very few people are. But Studebaker Corporation was founded in 1852. It's a venerable old company. Initially, they manufactured carriages and wagons, for horse-drawn transportation. In 1902, they began producing gasoline cars, automobiles. And for 50 years, from 1912 to 1952, they had a reputation for producing some of the highest quality automobiles. In 1952, that's after 50 years of producing cars and 50 years of horse-drawn vehicles, they celebrated their centennial, that's 100 years, as being one of the world's largest manufacturers of quality automobiles. And in that year, they had record sales. But it was the aftermath of the Second World War. Things were beginning to slide economically. The post-World War II economy was lagging. Declining work standards, other social problems, and Studebaker found themselves in a little bit of economic difficulty. They decided to completely reinvent themselves. They'd still produce cars, but they created a whole new model series that didn't look anything like the previous models. They were completely new, completely different. And then in 1956, that was in 1956, in 1958, they decided to come up with another innovation. They produced the V8 engine, first in America. And then they also produced the six-cylinder engine with overhead cam. I'm not a mechanic, I don't know what that means, but it was a significant breakthrough. By 1966, 8 years later, they were completely out of business. They tried to reinvent themselves radically, and 8 years later they were completely out of business. And today Studebaker exists only as a museum. Wonderful museum that glories only in the past and has no future reality. Another interesting organization is Kodak. Kodak, unlike Studebaker, Kodak was so proud of their innovations in filmography. They produced some of the best film material for cameras and motion picture cameras in the world. Then came digital photography. And Studebaker, Kodak just said, nah, that's nothing. They continued to make films. And little by little, they lost market share. Nobody was buying films anymore. Everything had gone digital. Kodak missed an opportunity, did not go digital. They were so fixated on their past that they were unable to adapt to a new reality. But more than that, they lost sight of what their mission was. Their mission was never film. Their mission was photography. But they were so fixated on film that they forgot about photography as photography moved into a digital era. And they lost it. Somebody has talked about the idea of there being corporate life cycles or organizational life cycles. That something often begins as a movement. It's a new thing. It's a lot of enthusiasm around it, a lot of excitement. Begins as a movement, and then slowly it becomes more and more organized, because that's necessary to have discipline in a movement so that we can all be walking in one direction and things are coordinated properly. And then after it's been organized, it kind of moves into a new reality of institutionality. It becomes an institution. So from movement to organization to institution. Institutions are also necessary because institutions kind of serve as an icon perpetuating things into the future, beyond our lifetime, into the next generation. But very soon, institutions become monuments. We begin to exist for the institution, and it becomes a monument, and then it devolves into a museum. Let it never be said that we became, as Prison Fellowship International, an institution that becomes a monument that will eventually become a museum. We have to have a healthy perspective on the past without worshiping and idolizing the past, but taking those elements from the past that are worth preserving, our unity, for example, our unity in Christ, our calling, our core mission, and let us always be flexible as we look forward so that we can respond to new opportunities, new realities, without completely turning our backs on the past, but embracing new opportunities as the world around us changes. Similar observation was made concerning the church, and I don't mean this as a criticism on any church. This is a sociologist who has made this observation, saying that the church began in the Middle East as a person. It began with the person of Jesus Christ. It became organized as Jesus called disciples to himself. And those disciples, after Jesus was raised from the dead and they became the apostles, they were responsible to carry on the legacy of Jesus. They organized themselves. They became organized. So in the Middle East, it began as a person and as an organism. As it spread into Asia Minor, it became a movement. We read in the Acts of the Apostles how this movement spread. There were thousands added to the church as the fire of the Spirit swept along with the work of the apostles. Then the Roman Empire came in, kind of co-opted what was happening. And the church became an institution, became institutionalized. And somebody has cynically observed that when the church came to America, it became a business. Sadly, that's partly true. Aspects of that are true. Dr. Mendez and I were talking a little bit this morning as well about the importance of values and character formation. How the values that we grow up with in our families, values that we grow up with as children, form our character and are expressed in what we do and how we do things in adulthood.